The moment he walked into that room, he knew something was wrong. Queen Camilla wasn't reviewing the late Queen's will. She was altering it, crossing out lines, adding her own, and doing it all with a legal advisor who wasn't even supposed to be there. That's when the royal guard stepped forward and laid down the original version Queen Elizabeth had sealed and entrusted to him. Word for word, it exposed everything. And when Camilla refused to stop, he tore up the papers she was rewriting right in front of her. Before I show you exactly how one guard protected the crown from being quietly rewritten, make sure you're subscribed with the bell on and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because what you're about to witness isn't speculation. It's the line between inheritance and theft. Windsor Castle has this way of settling into itself after the day's ceremonies end. The afternoon light fades through those ancient mullioned windows, casting everything in amber, and you can almost hear the stones exhale. That's when the place stops performing and starts remembering. When the tourists have gone home and the press photographers have packed up their lenses, leaving only the people who actually live with the weight of history. Sergeant Callum Rourke knew that feeling better than most. At 47, with 2 decades of guarding royalty and twice as many years understanding their secrets, he'd learned to read the difference between ceremony and crisis. Tonight he stood in one of those invisible corners of the castle, just outside Queen Elizabeth's private study. Not the polished state rooms with their gold-leafed furniture and oil paintings of forgotten kings, but the small, tucked-away chamber behind the West Wing library where she'd once written letters by hand until her fingers cramped. The study had been sealed since the funeral, not with chains or dramatic locks, but with something more powerful: respect. Even King Charles entered only when absolutely necessary, and always with witnesses. The room still smelled faintly of her lavender hand cream and the particular ink she preferred for correspondence, royal blue, from a company that had held the royal warrant since 1894. Rourke wasn't supposed to be here tonight. Officially, his rotation had ended at 6, but the duty roster for internal security had come up thin. Something about budget cuts and most of the senior guards being reassigned to upcoming state functions. When the opportunity came up to volunteer for evening archive duty, he'd raised his hand without thinking twice. He should have been home by now, feet up, watching the football highlights with a proper pint. Instead, he was standing guard over empty corridors and the ghosts of conversations he'd never been meant to hear. That's when he heard the footsteps. Sharp heels on parquet flooring, too deliberate for staff, too quick for the usual evening cleaning rounds. He turned quietly, adjusting the ceremonial sash across his Coldstream Guard tunic, and felt that familiar tightening in his chest that meant trouble was coming, whether he wanted it or not. Queen Camilla appeared around the corner like she owned the place, which, technically, she did. But there was something different about the way she moved tonight. No acknowledgement of his presence. No polite nod. She was followed by a man Rourke didn't recognise, civilian clothes, carrying 2 leather briefcases that looked old enough to have served in colonial offices. The stranger kept his eyes down, like someone who'd been told not to make conversation with the help. They walked straight to the sealed study without a word. Camilla didn't knock, she didn't pause. She simply placed her hand on the brass doorknob, the one that hadn't turned in 2 years, and walked in like she was retrieving her reading glasses. The door clicked shut behind them. Rourke stood there for a moment, listening to the silence that followed, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. His instincts, honed by too many years in places where the wrong decision meant someone didn't come home, were starting to whisper warnings he couldn't ignore. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't ceremony. This was something else entirely. A memory hit him then, so sharp and clear it might have been yesterday instead of nearly 2 years ago. It was March, just weeks before Elizabeth would enter her final decline. The afternoon had that grey, tired quality that English springs are famous for, and the Queen, then 95 but still sharp enough to cut glass, had appeared at his corridor post without fanfare. "Sergeant Rourke," she'd said in that voice that could command armies or comfort grandchildren, "walk with me." He'd followed her through passages tourists never saw, past portraits of monarchs whose names most people had forgotten until they reached her private study. She'd stood by the window in her riding coat, still wearing gloves, looking out at the lawn, where gardeners were planting something that would bloom long after she was gone. "Do you understand the difference between inheritance and stewardship?" she'd asked, without turning around. "I believe so, ma'am." "Most people don't," she'd continued, finally facing him. "They think the Crown owns things. In reality, we simply hold them, like trustees. Everything passes through our hands, but nothing truly belongs to us." That's when she'd opened the desk drawer and removed an envelope. Heavy cream paper, sealed with red wax pressed with her personal crest. His name written across the front in that distinctive handwriting, upright, compressed, economical. The penmanship of someone who'd signed 1,000 state documents and learned not to waste motion. "I'm entrusting this to you," she'd said, holding the envelope like it contained something fragile, not to be opened unless something ambiguous arises regarding my final wishes. He'd accepted it without question, but she wasn't finished. "Legacy has a way of tempting people toward revision," she'd said quietly. "If anyone, regardless of title or relationship, attempts to quietly rewrite history after I'm gone, you'll know what to do." "Ma'am," he'd said carefully, "with respect, I'm a soldier, not a solicitor." Her smile had been sad, knowing, tinged with something that looked almost like prophecy. "Precisely why I'm trusting you with this." The envelope had sat in his personal safe for nearly 2 years now, tucked beneath service medals and family photographs, gathering the kind of dust that only accumulates on things you hope you'll never need. Until tonight, he'd almost convinced himself it was just the paranoid precaution of a very old woman who'd lived through too much history to trust anyone completely. Now, listening to muffled voices coming from behind that sealed door, he was beginning to understand that paranoia and preparation sometimes looked remarkably similar. Rourke moved through Windsor's corridors like a man retracing steps to a battlefield. Not quickly. Speed drew attention, but with the kind of purposeful quiet that came from years of moving through places where your footsteps might be the difference between completing a mission and becoming a casualty. But first, he needed to check something that had been nagging at him since he'd seen Camilla's companion with those old briefcases. He took a detour to the security office, a cramped room behind the main stairwell where digital logs tracked every door, every key card, every authorized entry throughout the castle. The duty officer, a young corporal named Davies, looked up from his crossword puzzle. "Evening, Sergeant. Thought your shift ended hours ago." "Couldn't sleep," Rourke said, which wasn't entirely a lie. "Mind if I check the access logs for the West Wing? Thought I heard movement earlier." Davies pulled up the system on his monitor. The screen showed a timeline of entries, each marked with timestamps and authorization codes. Rourke's eyes scanned the list until he found what made his blood run cold. 7 unauthorized entries, 7 different chambers, all accessed within the past 3 hours using manual override codes that shouldn't have existed. Not just the Queen's study, the private archive, the ceremonial vault, even the restricted manuscript room where she'd kept her personal correspondence with world leaders. This wasn't opportunistic theft, this was systematic looting. "Jesus," Davies muttered, seeing the pattern. "Should I trigger a security alert?" "Not yet," Rourke said quietly, "but keep monitoring. If anyone else tries to access those areas tonight, you call me immediately." The Queen's private legal chamber wasn't just any room. It was where she'd kept the documents too sensitive for public filing. Draft wills, private letters, personal bequests that needed to exist somewhere between official record and family confidence. After her death, the chamber had been sealed under archival protocol, requiring authorization from both the reigning monarch and the Lord President of the Privy Council to reopen. Rourke would have seen the paperwork. There was always paperwork. Memos circulated through the Palace Protection Unit whenever restricted areas were accessed, even by family members. It was basic security protocol, the kind of routine that kept institutions functioning and prevented exactly the kind of unauthorized entry he was witnessing. But now, knowing about the other chambers, this felt less like family business and more like a coordinated raid on the Crown's most sensitive documents. He positioned himself just outside the doorway, close enough to hear, but far enough to remain unseen. The door had been propped open, with a small brass stopper, the kind of careless detail that suggested whoever was inside didn't expect to be discovered. Inside, voices carried in the still air. "Remove this entire section," Camilla was saying, her tone businesslike but tense. "The language about national stewardship is unnecessarily restrictive." "That's Clause 9C, replied the man. He had a solicitor's voice, careful and precise. "It specifically addresses the royal collection's status." "Are you certain you want it eliminated entirely?" "I want it gone," she said flatly. Elizabeth always had this obsession with preservation over practicality. These pieces are family property. They should be treated as such. Papers rustled, the sound of a pen scratching across parchment. "What about this clause regarding Balmoral?" the man asked. "The provision about maintaining the estate in perpetuity for the nation." "Change it," Camilla said without hesitation. Something about subject to the discretion of the royal household would be more appropriate, more flexible. Rourke felt his jaw tighten. He'd been to Balmoral. He'd seen the brass plaque in the chapel, polished every morning by staff who treated it like scripture. May this land remain untouched by politics or inheritance. Elizabeth's own words, carved in metal that was supposed to outlast the people who read them. "Your Majesty," the man, Miles Denham, said hesitantly, "I should mention that Sir Jeremy's preliminary work on the other documents has raised some concerns." Camilla's voice sharpened. "What kind of concerns?" "The Royal Archive Office has been asking questions about access codes, about who authorised entry to the sealed chambers. Sir Jeremy thinks we may have limited time before they notice the pattern." Sir Jeremy. Rourke's memory clicked. Sir Jeremy Whitmore, the Queen's former private secretary, who'd been quietly dismissed 3 months after the funeral, officially for personal reasons, but there had been whispers about unauthorised access to confidential files. "How much time?" Camilla asked. "Days, not weeks." "Which is why I'm suggesting we focus on the most essential changes. The Balmoral clause, certainly. The collection trust provisions. But perhaps we could defer the more extensive revisions." "No," Camilla said firmly. "We do this properly or not at all. Add a provision under the personal effects section. Something that allows for discretionary distribution of heirlooms without external verification. The bureaucracy around these items is absurd." Denham paused, and Rourke could hear him flipping through pages. "What about the charitable provisions? Clause 15 establishes several permanent trusts." "Reduce them," she said without hesitation. Elizabeth was generous to a fault. "Scale back the amounts, redirect the savings to family discretionary funds. That would affect dozens of organisations. The Literacy Foundation alone receives." "I'm not interested in maintaining Elizabeth's pet charities forever," Camilla interrupted coldly. "The Crown has current responsibilities that take precedence over sentiment." The sound of more scratching, reluctant but compliant. "Your Majesty," Denham said carefully, "these changes would represent significant deviations from the original document filed with the Privy Council. If there's ever an audit—" "There won't be an audit if the revised version becomes the official record," she replied matter-of-factly, "which is exactly what's going to happen." "Sir Jeremy has already prepared the filing corrections." Rourke pressed himself closer to the wall. This wasn't just document alteration, it was a coordinated conspiracy involving multiple people, multiple chambers, and what sounded like systematic fraud. "We should complete our work," Camilla continued. "Sir Jeremy will handle the archive substitutions tomorrow night. By the end of the week, there will be only one version of the Queen's will in existence. And the witnesses to the original are elderly, distant, or sufficiently convinced that their memories might be imperfect," she said, with chilling pragmatism. "Time has a way of creating doubt about what people think they remember." Rourke had heard enough. This wasn't grief-motivated impulse, or family disagreement about inheritance. This was premeditated theft of a dead woman's legacy, orchestrated by people who understood exactly how to manipulate institutional memory. Rourke had heard enough. This wasn't updating or clarifying. This was revision with intent, the systematic alteration of a dead woman's wishes by people who stood to benefit from the changes. He stepped away from the doorway and made his way back toward his quarters, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd just shifted from observer to participant. The envelope was waiting where he'd left it, locked in the small safe beneath layers of official documents and personal history. His hands were steady as he worked the combination: 2 left, 4 right, back 1 notch. The safe opened with a metallic whisper, revealing the cream-coloured envelope with its unbroken seal. He broke the wax carefully, aware that whatever was inside had been waiting 2 years for this exact moment. There were 2 items: a brief letter on royal stationery and a small card bearing the Queen's personal seal. The letter read, "To whom it may concern. The final version of my will has been properly filed with the Privy Council Office and secured in the Royal Archives under succession protocol. Any document claiming to represent my wishes must bear 3 verifications. 1. My original signature and date, witnessed and confirmed. 1. Documented transmission through Privy Council channels. 1. Registry identification matching archived records. Any deviation from this protocol, regardless of source, relationship, or claimed authority, is to be treated as invalid and contested. A verified copy remains in the study bookcase, 3rd shelf, green binding, marked E2R. You are authorized to present it when constitutional clarity is required, with trust in your discretion. Elizabeth Archer. Rourke lowered the letter, understanding flooding through him like cold water. She hadn't just suspected this might happen, she'd prepared for it. He crossed to the bookcase and found the green-bound folio exactly where she'd said it would be. Inside were 12 pages of legal text, precisely formatted, every clause numbered and cross-referenced. No handwritten annotations, no ambiguous language about discretionary distribution or household preferences. Just the clean, uncompromising language of someone who'd understood exactly how precious clarity becomes after you're no longer alive to provide it. He slipped the folio into a document carrier and sealed it properly. Not because he was looking for a fight, but because sometimes the most important battles are the ones you hope you'll never have to fight. Rourke didn't announce himself when he returned to the legal chamber. He simply walked in like it was still his responsibility to be there, which, according to the letter in his pocket, it was. Camilla and Denham were seated now, heads close together, over what looked like a substantially revised document. Several pages lay spread across the table, marked with the kind of meticulous alterations that suggested this wasn't their first editing session. Denham looked up first. "Sergeant, we're in the middle of something rather sensitive." Rourke set the green-bound folio on the table beside their work, not aggressively, just firmly enough to make it impossible to ignore. "This version," he said calmly, "bears Her Majesty's verified signature, proper witness confirmations, and Privy Council registry numbers. The document you're revising doesn't." Camilla looked at the folio, then at him. Something cold flickered behind her eyes. "I wasn't aware palace guards had become experts in inheritance law," she said. "No, ma'am," Rourke replied, "but I was instructed to act when discrepancies arose." "By the Queen herself." Denham cleared his throat nervously. "We were working from notes provided by Her Majesty's personal staff. Clarifications she'd intended to make before her passing." "Her clarifications are there," Rourke said, nodding toward the official folio. "Filed, witnessed and sealed according to Crown protocol. What you're working on isn't a clarification. It's a replacement." Camilla's face hardened. "You're accusing me of forgery?" "I'm pointing out that the authorized version exists, ma'am, and it's different from the one you're creating." She stood slowly, her composure cracking just slightly around the edges. "You have no idea what conversations took place between Elizabeth and me. What she promised, what she intended." "With respect," Rourke said, "intentions don't override legal documents. Not when they're properly filed." "I am the Queen Consort," she said, each word carefully measured. "These are family matters." "The Crown isn't family property, ma'am. It belongs to the nation." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet tick of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Then Camilla reached for the revised document, gathering the pages like she was preparing to leave with them. That's when Rourke acted. He didn't snatch the papers or make a show of it. He simply reached across the table, lifted the altered pages, and, with the same calm precision he'd once used to disarm explosives, tore them cleanly in half. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. Camilla froze, staring at the torn halves with an expression somewhere between shock and fury. Denham took a step backward, suddenly looking like a man who'd realised he was standing too close to something that might explode. "You've just destroyed a legal document," Camilla said, her voice deadly quiet. "No, ma'am," Rourke replied, setting the torn pieces neatly on the table. "I've destroyed an unauthorized alteration of a legal document. The real version is right here." He reached for his cuff and pressed a small black button concealed beneath the fabric. A soft chime echoed from the corridor, not an alarm, just a formal notification that would summon the appropriate authorities. Protocol Level 1. Constitutional matter requiring immediate attention. Camilla's eyes blazed. "You've just escalated a private family matter to the Crown." "Ma'am," Rourke said quietly, "it was already there." The aftermath came swiftly and professionally, the way serious things do in places where protocol has been refined over centuries. The first to arrive wasn't King Charles, but Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Morrison from the Metropolitan Police's Royal Protection Unit. She entered with the kind of measured authority that suggested she'd seen enough constitutional crises to know the difference between scandal and genuine threat. Behind her came two forensic specialists carrying evidence collection kits. "Sergeant Rourke!" Morrison's voice carried the crisp efficiency of someone who didn't have time for pleasantries. "I'm DCI Morrison. We received your Protocol Level 1 trigger. What exactly are we dealing with?" Rourke gestured toward the torn documents and the official folio. "Systematic alteration of the late Queen's will, ma'am. Multiple unauthorized archive entries. Conspiracy involving at least 3 individuals." Morrison's eyes sharpened. 3 individuals? Queen Camilla, Mr. Denham here, and a Sir Jeremy Whitmore, who appears to be coordinating document substitutions. "Former Private Secretary Whitmore?" Morrison's expression darkened. "We've been investigating him for 3 months. Suspected archive tampering, but we couldn't establish direct evidence." Camilla finally found her voice. "This is absurd. I'm being treated like a common criminal over family paperwork." Morrison turned to face her with professional courtesy that somehow managed to be more intimidating than outright hostility. "Your Majesty, at this stage we're simply securing evidence and establishing facts. May I ask how you gained access to this sealed chamber?" "I don't need permission to enter my own home." "Actually, ma'am, you do need authorization to access restricted archives." "The chamber's access tonight are protected under the Crown Estate Security Act. Even family members require proper clearance." Morrison's forensic team was already photographing the torn documents, the official folio, and the contents of Denham's briefcases. One of them looked up with interest. "Ma'am, these forgery tools are sophisticated, professional grade, document scanner, parchment matcher, even a thermal aging device for making new ink look old." "Those belong to Mr. Denham," Camilla said quickly. Denham's face went white. "Your Majesty, with respect, you specifically requested—" "Mr. Denham," Morrison interrupted, "I'm going to need you to remain silent until we can arrange proper legal representation." That's when the sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of the person everyone had been expecting. King Charles III appeared in the doorway, like judgment personified, not in regalia, but wearing the kind of expression that suggested the weight of the crown had just become very real, very quickly. Behind him came Sir Alaric Finch, the Royal Legal Secretary, looking grim. Then 2 officials from the Privy Council office, carrying sealed document cases and electronic tablets. Finally, Lord Patterson, the Lord Chamberlain, whose presence indicated this had escalated to the highest levels of palace administration. Charles surveyed the scene methodically, the torn papers, the evidence collection, his wife standing rigid with barely contained fury, and said simply, "Brief me." Morrison provided a concise summary while the forensic team continued their work. Charles listened without interruption, his expression growing progressively more grave. 7 chambers? He asked finally. Yes, sir. All accessed, using override codes that were supposedly disabled after Her late Majesty's death. And Sir Jeremy's involvement? We have recorded conversations placing him as the coordinator of archive substitutions, Rourke said, producing a small digital recorder from his pocket. Audio evidence of the conspiracy to replace original documents with altered versions. Charles's eyes widened slightly. You recorded this? Standing orders from Her late Majesty, sir. Any constitutional irregularities were to be documented for potential legal proceedings. Finch examined both documents, the authorized version and the torn alterations, with the methodical attention of someone who'd spent decades ensuring that legal language meant exactly what it said. The registry numbers match our archived records, he confirmed to Charles. The authorized version was filed 3 months before Her Majesty's passing, properly witnessed and sealed. The altered version, he held up one of the torn halves, contains at least 17 substantive changes to inheritance law, estate distribution, and charitable obligations. Lord Patterson cleared his throat. Your Majesty, this represents the most serious breach of Crown succession protocols in modern history. The implications. I understand the implications, Charles said quietly. He looked at Camilla, and for the first time since entering the room, his composure showed cracks. Not anger, something deeper. Disappointment, mixed with the terrible recognition that some betrayals can't be forgiven simply because they hurt too much to acknowledge. Were you planning to tell me? He asked. Tell you what? She replied, but her defiance had lost its edge. That you were rewriting my mother's will. That you were stealing from charities she'd supported for decades. That you were planning to sell Balmoral. I was protecting our family's interests by destroying her legacy. His voice remained level, but the words carried the weight of absolute judgment. By turning the crown into a personal inheritance scheme. Camilla's mask finally cracked completely. She was selfish, Charles. Selfish and controlling. Even in death, she was trying to dictate terms to people who'd have to live with the consequences. The silence that followed felt like something fundamental breaking. Morrison stepped forward. Your Majesty, we'll need to expand this investigation. If Sir Jeremy has been coordinating archive substitutions, we may be looking at systematic fraud across multiple royal estates. Charles nodded once, slowly. You have my full cooperation, whatever you need. What about? Morrison glanced meaningfully at Camilla. Charles took a deep breath, the kind a man takes before making a decision that will echo through generations. The crown must be protected, he said finally, from all threats, regardless of their source. Camilla looked at her husband with something that might have been recognition, not of forgiveness, but of consequence. You're choosing them over me, she said quietly. I'm choosing duty over preference, he replied, the same choice every monarch makes. The same choice my mother made every day of her reign. Later that evening, after the officials had departed and the documents had been properly archived, Rourke returned to his usual post outside the royal study. Same position, same responsibilities, but something fundamental had shifted. He'd crossed a line that most guards never even approach, the space between following orders and making decisions that would echo through history. He'd challenged someone who outranked him in every possible way, and he'd done it based on nothing more than the trust of a dead woman and his own understanding of what duty actually meant. As the castle settled into its evening quiet, Rourke stood watch over corridors that had witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties. Somewhere in the secured archives, Queen Elizabeth's actual wishes rested under climate-controlled glass, protected from revision or reinterpretation. Not because they were perfect, but because they were final. And in the space between what people wanted the past to say and what it actually meant, one guard had chosen to let the dead speak for themselves. A young palace intern approached him near midnight, curiosity written across his face. "Sir?" the boy asked hesitantly. "Is it true what they're saying? About the will?" Rourke kept his eyes on the corridor ahead, watching for threats that might never come. "The crown has many treasures," he said quietly, "but the most valuable ones can't be stolen. They can only be earned." The intern thought about that for a moment, then continued on his way. Rourke remained at his post as Windsor's ancient stones held their vigil around him. Somewhere in the main residence, conversations were happening that would reshape relationships and redefine boundaries. Decisions were being made that would echo through generations. But here, in the quiet corridor outside the Queen's study, the past was secure. And sometimes, that's all a guard can do. Now here's what I want to know. Do you think Sergeant Rourke was right to destroy those papers, even though a Queen consort was holding them? And what about King Charles? Should he have defended his wife, or does duty to the crown come before family loyalty? Most importantly, when someone dies, who really owns their legacy, their family or the institution they served? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you believe some things are more important than titles, hit that like button right now. Make sure you subscribe with notifications on, because tomorrow we're investigating another case where royal protocol met personal ambition, and protocol won. Share this with someone who thinks royal guards are just for show, because after today, we all know better. Another confrontation is waiting for you on screen right now. Click it, and I'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, here on Guard Watch. Thanks for watching. Sometimes the most important battles are fought in silence.